I am Deborah Quazzo, and I'm from GSV Ventures and ASU+GSV Summit, and I am thrilled to have for our Founders Forum today, Ashwin Damera, the co-founder and CEO of Emeritus, sometimes known as Eruditus. I go back and forth with the two big brands. I'm going to actually start off with a question on really hot off the presses. Today or yesterday, you all announced that you had closed a $350 million debt financing with a CPPIB, a group that I know well, and they're terrific, to help fund your aggressive acquisition plans overseas. So, what can you? That's big, and it sounds like you'll be planning to add some additional capital on the equity side later this year. So, love to hear any comment you can make on that, Ashwin. And it sounds like that you've got a very strong road ahead.
So first of all, Deborah, thank you for having me. Always a pleasure to talk to you. Look, Emeritus has predominantly grown organically. We are in the 11th year of our existence. But with all that's happened in the last 2 years in higher ed, we see a massive opportunity to grow even faster, sometimes organically, sometimes in partnership with other companies, and sometimes through more strategic M&A. We did that about 6 months back with ID Tech, a company in the K-12 space. But we absolutely see the opportunity to do a lot more. And this will be thematic, right? So for example, enterprise, growing global, maybe subscription platforms, and so on and so forth. And I've said this before that, we expect that we will deploy about $1 billion in M&A over the next 12 months. And so to fund that M&A, we raised some debt from the Canadian pension fund, CPPIB, who are already investors from our last round. Right. So it's a show of confidence from them. We're super excited. We're fully fueled, and obviously we'll be selective on M&A and look at synergistic ones. But we're excited that we now have the ability to do more in the space.
Okay, we'll come back to the timing in the market today, but I certainly think it's an opportunistic moment to be a category leader and to have a capital moat as a category leader. So I have a lot of excitement on anticipating what you guys will announce over the next couple of years. Let me peel it back to the beginning. I'll start back when you and Che founded Emeritus around the 2010 period, which people probably generally think you founded it later than that, but actually you all were in the market working on what the vision would be in 2010. And it was after you successfully exited from a travel business that you co-founded. Talk to me about the big vision at the outset. Having talked to some of your investors, I think they're always impressed with how your vision has evolved with each sort of subsequent year. The big vision today, and actually talk a minute about why education, because back in 2010, as you well recall, because as someone who's toiled in the education sector for 25 years myself, it's not always been sexy. It's always been important, but not sexy. So it was in 2010, it was not viewed to be the hottest category in tech. And so love to hear kind of how you all zeroed in on this.
So Deborah, I grew up in India. I'm still based in India. Right now, I'm in Mumbai. And, if you know India well, or actually if I just look out of my window, I think you can characterize what I see as, oceans of poverty and islands of prosperity. And if you think deeply about who gets to be in the island versus the ocean, it's really access to education.
Yeah.
And growing up as a kid, and later on in my life, having the good fortune of getting a great education, it changed the trajectory of my life. It helped me realize perhaps my full potential. But when I came back to India and started my first startup and started working again here, you realize that most people don't have access to that education. They don't have access to the tools that can help them be who they actually can be. And so way back in 2010, we didn't start, it was Eruditus then, it's Emeritus now. We didn't start the company because we were hoping to be a unicorn or because education was sexy. All of that happened much later. But we just started it because we had this mission, Chet and I, my co-founder and I, that, hey, we need to do something. We need to give back because both of us were beneficiaries of high quality education. And so the mission was to make high quality education accessible and affordable. In 2015, 2016, we went online, and suddenly the business that was supposed to be for India, that was kind of classroom, became online, became global. In 2017, we raised our first round, and then many things happened. I always say that no entrepreneur can take success very seriously because so many extraneous factors happen, and if they happen with good timing for you, you actually just get a lot of benefit of that, right? So we were lucky in many ways. But then as much as we may be considered successful today, it's back to the mission. How do we make high quality education accessible and affordable? So it informs our M&A strategy. It'll inform who we hire. It'll inform what we will not do. There are opportunities that could be very profitable for us, but we won't pursue them because it doesn't go back to access and affordability of education.
We call it return on education. We won't make an investment that doesn't increase access, lower cost, provide leverage to the learning leader, or improve learning or skilling outcomes. One or all of the above has to be there. So you've been very, very, and I think the other thing that's fascinating is that you all did bootstrap for really 7 years, right?
Yeah,
which is almost unheard of today.
From 2010 all the way till 2017, we ran the company without any capital. But in that period of time, what did we do? Our first university partner was INSEAD, and that was in 2010. A year later, Wharton. A year later, MIT. A year later, Columbia Business School. So literally one university partner a year. But we spend a lot of time with the decision makers, with the faculty, trying to perfect the pedagogy. And so when we actually went online, we didn't go online using the MOOC methodology. We felt that kind of the nice things that happen in a classroom, peer-to-peer interaction with a live faculty or instructor, when you submit an assignment, getting feedback, all of that was integral to the learning experience. And how could we take that online? Online should not be an inferior learning experience, but that came through those 5-7 years where we really sat in the classroom, worked closely with faculty, sat side by side with students, and saw what they really valued. So yes, if you're looking back, one could question, hey, should we have raised capital and grown faster? But I think our path in some ways was the right one, because today where we are is also because we had those 7 years of just perfecting the product.
And you would have been early to market. So it's interesting. A lot of our audience at ASU+GSV, as you well know, are EdTech founders from all over the world. And so I like to try to tap into successful founders and get some perspective and advice for new founders. I've listened. I did a bunch of listening to interviews with you recently, and have loved hearing you speak with incredible passion about the importance of having a great co-founder in Chait. And I'd love to have you speak to how the two of you found each other, and what has exactly made that relationship so important to the company's success. You were clearly the more visible partner in that, in terms of press, and so there are obviously dynamics around who chooses to be more and less visible, and so I'd love to hear kind of everything about that, and what should founders think about as they're considering launching an initiative with a co-founder that they hadn't known previously, because I don't think you guys knew each other previously.
That's right. My first startup was a solo journey. It was a lonely journey. Anybody who's been on the startup path knows that there are highs and there are lows. The highs are actually easy because there are always people to celebrate them. But the lows, you can't tell your team of 50 people that you have 1 month or 2 months of cash in the bank, right? Or an investor you spoke to just said no. And so treading that path with a co-founder, I think, is valuable. But having said that, the right co-founder is more important than just any co-founder, right? So who's the right co-founder? The way I think about this, and I've been extremely fortunate to have Chait, is that you want to have a co-founder where the core values are like identical, very similar. Like what we will do and what we will not do, why and what matters to us, what is purpose, right? And Chait and I are very, very aligned on that. However, on the skill sets and capabilities, you don't want to be so similar, because then what's the point, right? So you will see, like you rightly pointed out, right? I'm more out there. I'm more public. I'm thinking about growth. I'm thinking about scale. Chait is the purist. He worked in INSEAD in executive education. So he's thinking very deeply about learner outcomes. He's thinking about, hey, how do we move the technology to where it isn't today, but to kind of turn on the teaching at a different level. And so the combination of that, which is the quality and then thinking of scale, because part of our mission, Deborah, is we think it's great if you can teach 30 people really well in a small classroom. but it's 30 people. And if you can do that for 30,000 or 1 million, then you're really changing the world, right, through them. So it's both Chait and I, when we get together and think about quality and scale, I think it's been a great journey. The other thing I'll say is, look, all said and done, like it applies for hiring. You want to hire people who are better than you. You want a co-founder who's better than you. And I've been humbled many, many times by how much better Chait is than I am. Yes, I may be more visible, but it's amazing what he does actually behind closed doors.
Yeah, we love founder combinations of an academic orientation and a tech and scaling and operations orientation. We think those are incredibly powerful combinations. By the way, how many learners do you guys serve at this point?
So in the last 12 months, we've enrolled about 250,000 students in various courses offered by our university partners, both B2C and B2B combined.
That's great. That's great. Well, we have an investment theme that we've had for a while, which is ed tech as an export, and we believe in the case of India that ed tech should be one of its greatest exports. It probably really is already. You talked about it a little bit earlier, but Emeritus is really a poster child for that investment theme. And interestingly, for those of us who've been hanging around the ed tech sector for many years, I think one of the most important things that's changed about ed tech, and it was really had begun to change pre-pandemic, but it had historically been a very parochial delivery, right? You were an Indian company, you delivered in India, American companies delivered in America, and those walls came down, the world became flat. Talk about your global business. It's actually pretty remarkable how widely dispersed you all are, and how many countries you're serving at this point. Also love to hear about kind of the challenges that has presented as you were running so many global locations, and challenges and opportunities of that expansion.
I think when we started working with US and UK universities, they really thought of us as an extension of their operations for India. But then slowly we realized that there's an Indian diaspora in the Middle East and Asia Pacific, and so we expanded. And then when we kind of went online, we expanded even more because, an MIT, a Cambridge, a Berkeley, these are Kellogg, these are brands that are known across the world.
Right.
So in some sense, our global footprint and expansion kind of happened. But then, there's also a lot of will and things to do to actually make it successful. We've had missteps. We've tried to go into China with a joint venture. That's failed. We've had to change leadership in Latin America, etc. We've learned a lot, but today I think we're in a good place, right? So today, about 30% of our students are from the United States, but 70% are outside. 20% approximately in India, a similar number, for example, in Latin America, Southeast Asia, China, Europe, and other parts, including Middle East and Africa. The other interesting statistic on that is about 15% of our students are learning in languages other than English. So Spanish, Portuguese, Mandarin, we're piloting something in Arabic, and we may want to go further because going back to our mission of access and affordability, even if a course is affordable and it's online, if it's not in the right language, maybe it's not accessible to a very large population, right? So part of global is also thinking through these kinds of issues. So I'll give you one other example. In markets like Latin America, India, and China, if you're actually not talking to the prospective student on a phone, there's a very low chance that they will actually enroll. And they have a lot of questions, right? So you have to provide that extra layer of service. So we've really focused on global. It's kind of in our DNA in some sense. And there's a joke in the company, when I say global, I mean the United States. When the US team says global, it usually means the rest of the world. Right? So there's a bit of a joke on that. The one thing I would say for companies looking to go global is sitting in India or sitting in the US, you can't be dictating to a LATAM CEO or somebody in the Middle East or in China how to run their business. So I think of our global operations as startups within a startup, right? Mm-hmm. You have to hire people who are local, maybe have a global mindset and exposure, but are highly entrepreneurial. Give them the resources and get out of the way. Let them build the right product, the right team, the right go-to-market for that particular space. And Deborah, it's amazing. It's easy to say we're in higher ed, but every market is kind of a microcosm, right? There's so many different things in that market. The product for India is very different from what we do, say, with US universities. Right. And so that local orientation is super important to succeed.
As you sort of project forward and think about just the population growth and the youth in Africa, for example, and the decline at the same time, the declining rates of population in emerging or in developed countries like the U.S. So is that kind of where your future, where your future lies?
Absolutely. I mean, there is a secular trend in the demographic that anyway is going to play, but there's also many emerging markets where the purchasing power is increasing, and therefore the aspiration for high quality education is. I would say India, Southeast Asia, North Africa at this point are definitely very high growth markets for us, and as well as markets where we are investing significantly in. And the opportunity in these markets are actually twofold. One is there's an aspiration with a certain section of the students to learn from global institutions, academic institutions. But equally, in many markets, there's a local institution that's actually a formidable brand. Right. So, for example, if you're in India, an IIT or an IIM is maybe your first preference compared to maybe a top-ranked US or a European university. And so our strategy is to work with both. And that actually allows us to straddle a lower price point in many cases and different formats as well. Right? Languages, for example, if you're in Latin America, if you can work with, say, Tec de Monterrey or IPADE, you can actually deliver in native Spanish, which is better in some sense than, say, translated or subtitled. Right? So our strategy has also evolved as we've gone more regional and local to also, work with the local universities.
Excellent. I'll roll it back again to actually the beginning, in fact. And I love the fact, which I actually hadn't realized until last year, that you and I share a great friend and mentor in legendary HBS professor Bill Salmon. Talk about the role that HBS and Bill played in your professional journey. Love to hear it.
I'm very happy to say that if not for Harvard Business School, I wouldn't be here. Right? And a big part of that experience was Bill Salmon.
And they'll be happy to have you say that too. I think they'll want me to send a clip.
But I'll say it happily, and I've said this to Bill many times, and he's fairly modest, so he kind of shrugs it off. But the truth is, his class and HBS, entrepreneurial finance, actually opened my eyes to saying I want to be an entrepreneur. Otherwise, coming from India with student debt, I was probably going to go to McKinsey. I had an offer to join them in the New York office. But I also had this opportunity to come back and start a company called Travel Guru in India. And I did speak with Bill, and I'm pretty sure he may not recollect this. He said, "You got the HBS degree. Why do you need more insurance? Go start." But he also, some of the stuff that he taught, basic stuff, like the best form of funding is from customers, not investors, right? Valuation matters, but so do terms. And, these are the kind of things that, I go back to and I say, look, they're so simple. But actually, in the hustle and bustle of entrepreneurship, a lot of founders, including myself, forget about it. So anyway, so Bill was very instrumental. A lot of the cases that he taught, I remember this case about Nantucket Nectars, for example. The founder was selling bottles off a boat, and then the business suddenly scaled. And so when do you know you need to scale? When do you need external capital? How do you pivot? How do you deal with failure? And all of those things. Yeah, so Bill was phenomenal. And also, for what we're doing today, working with, prestigious institutions, I think just having that background, knowing how the faculty think, how deep rooted they are in research and why it matters. I'll say one thing, Deborah, but my team as well, we have a deep respect for what these institutions do. Right. Many people will come and say, look, we're trying to disrupt higher ed. And I'm like, no, we're not disrupting higher ed. We're actually working with these phenomenal faculty who are teaching phenomenal stuff through research, but helping them scale their impact of their intellectual capital across the world, right? As collaborators, not as disruptors. But a lot of that came through those 2 years I spent at HBS and that deep respect I have for, just what such a high quality education system delivers.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. He'll love to hear it. And Bill's become so passionate about the opportunity for digital learning to change the world. So that's cool too. Let's swing into a little on sort of COVID, post-COVID. At GSV, we have a mantra that all people deserve equal access to the future. And we believe that innovations in education and workforce skilling are pretty critical levers in that. Obviously, you believe that too. The learning, the K, or I'd say the pre-K-12 learning loss has gotten a lot of attention globally. Obviously, it's devastating that children were not in school and the sort of cognitive IQ impacts and things like that. Do you think there is an equal crisis in the global, in the skills market? And do you think the approach to it has been transformed coming out of COVID. Just love to kind of get your window on the future of addressing these global skills gaps at scale.
Well, I don't know if there's a crisis or not, but there's definitely a huge challenge and there's a huge opportunity, depending on which perspective you take to look at it. Definitely, we have seen because of the last 2 years of COVID that, there's been a shift in kind of how the labor market, more of a gig economy. People are more responsible, are taking more of a ownership of what they do. And that is a fundamental shift. At the same time, we've seen that, there is more automation, there is new technology coming off, and a lot of workers, especially blue collar workers, are being displaced. And, and then there are geopolitical events as well. So there's a lot that's been going on. I would say that, if you think about the opportunity in front of us, which is to help people realize their full potential, whatever that is, right? But helping people realize their full potential, it has to come through education. It doesn't have to be a formal 4-year degree or a 2-year master's, and there's so many other models out there. In fact, one of the things that I'm super excited, and Deborah, you know this as well, is even how employers are stepping up to play a role here, right? And how universities are partnering with them, but companies are partnering with them, etc. I do believe that closing that skill gap is the biggest challenge as well as opportunity of our time. And at the same time, if you think about it, you can never ever close it. Right? You can narrow it, but you can never close it because it's always work in progress.
Yeah, I take that a little further into the sort of future, the future of credentials. I mean, you talked to it, degrees, certificates, et cetera. And also perhaps a little bit, there's obviously a lot of heat around the topic of Web3 and blockchain, and that plays into credentials, but it also plays into new skilling requirements. So can you kind of talk to those sort of two topics and where Emeritus is going to play in addressing that movement?
Yeah, look, I think there's been an increasing awareness of what matters is learning. The credential matters as well, but the learning is important as well. So I think what we do, nearly 95% of it is non-degree. We are interested in the degree market as well, but we are interested in low-cost, affordable degrees, right? And that's probably, and not surprising because 70% of our students are outside the US. That's where we see the real demand. In markets like India, in parts of Latin America and China, the credential is very, very important. They will, over a period of time, perhaps also kind of start valuing alternate credentials, but at this point of time, the credential is very, very important. I think for any institution, right, I mean, they have to think about both. How do they take their credential programs, for credit programs online and do it in a high quality way, but also the opportunity in taking kind of their certificate programs online. So both of those, I think, are something that we are working with our partner institutions in. As far as technology, right, I think Web 3.0, yes, in terms of, maybe on the credential side, certificate side, yes. But we are also quite excited by AR, the metaverse kind of stuff, but also how we can use technology to start, doing more. A great example is ASU, and they now have a biology 4-credit course, which is taught in a completely completely simulated environment. And, that's a great example of, using technology to actually enrich the learning experience and for a credential course. So there are a lot of new technologies coming out. Also, I think because education and online education has got so much focus. So I'm optimistic that, the way I think we will teach an online course 5 years from now will probably be significantly different from the way we're doing it today.
Yeah, I agree. And I agree that that's exciting. You talked about ID Tech a little bit earlier. You referenced it a little bit earlier. And my partner, Lubin Pampaloff, who wrote a terrific blog post a couple months ago, really talking about how the ed tech category, the category leaders in ed tech, are extending their lifetime value of the customer through organically and inorganically through moving across the pre-K to gray learner chain. So you started in higher ed, now you've got ID Tech, which pushes into high school and probably lower than that. Is that how you thought about ID Tech? And I assume, are you thinking about the lifelong learner arc as being critical to Emeritus's future?
Actually, no. We didn't think of ID Tech as more of an LTV grower, or catch them early and monetize them over a lifetime. The way we thought about it was somewhat different. like I said, our mission is to make high quality education accessible and affordable, and especially in the areas where there are the largest skill gaps. We saw an opportunity to work with young adults on STEM and other areas where there are large skill gaps, so to catch them early. Yep. Right. And what excited us about ID Tech was just kind of the learning outcomes that that company has, right? So 90% of the kids who go to their camps actually go on to do undergrad in college. 80% of them actually major in STEM. About 5 years ago, only 12% of their students were girls. This year, it's 40%. And if you speak to the founder, he'll say that unless it's 50% or more, our work is not yet done. Right. And so we just love the ability. And, we talk a lot about how do we get more women on the boards of tech companies, et cetera. But if you don't start early, you don't teach them coding and stuff, et cetera. So we found this. So this, again, the layer of access, right? So we say, hey, if we go work with ID Tech and young adults, we can actually do that. What we've been successful in doing as well, post coming together is, for example, we have a coding course with MIT. And now there's a version of that for teenagers. And so we're starting to think about, taking some of the content we have from, the best academic institutions and introducing young adults to that a little early to see if that's their passion and they want to kind of go into that space. Right? So that was our hypothesis, really teaching the skill-based courses early on to young adults.
And they also had university partnerships, which probably gave some synergy.
That is true. So they do a lot of their camps on university sites as well. So they understand how universities work and how to work with them. Okay.
All right. Well, this is fantastic. To finish this up, I want to go back to sort of the idea of providing advice to earlier startup founders who haven't yet achieved category leadership. We have certainly entered a much more difficult funding period. Obviously, the public markets have encountered a lot of difficulty for all growth stocks, but including the public ed tech companies. Needless to say, war, inflation, and everything else is contributing to anxiety. If you could step back, and I earlier talked to Michael Chazen, who from class and Blackboard. He started his company in 1997, so he actually lived through that first horrifying collapse of the internet bubble. What's your advice to founders, encountering the sort of the anxiety of a tougher private capital market, fundraising environment, valuation environment, and things like that? How do you put your head down and keep a stiff upper lip if you facing sort of these more challenging circumstances?
Yeah, look, I went through that in 2008. Lehman Brothers collapsed. We had like 2 months of cash in the bank. It was a tough journey, but some of life's best lessons are learned when you go through some of those experiences. Now, it's probably best if you haven't gone through them to learn from somebody else's experience and avoid it. So I'll just say a few things. Right? One is, in moments like this, cash is supreme. You really have to cut down burn and conserve cash. The last few years, we've gotten very used to, making ambitious bets. There are definitely moonlight projects that people have shot for and so on and so forth. And we'll have to reorient our mindset and say, look, maybe we wait 6 months, a year before we can actually go into that more. But really conserve cash. Think carefully about unit economics. Hunker down on what the core business is, and everything else, really think about whether you want to be burning cash on that. Right? That's number one. Number two, I would say, is to do that, you need to have these conversations with your management team and be very open and transparent about it. Right? So, for example, if you're shifting from a growth mindset to an EBITDA mindset, right? You need to have the whole company buy into that. And Deborah, one of the challenges is that the last 2 years have seen such exponential growth by tech companies that even as we are thinking through this and we are thinking about how we should respond, there is some amount of organizational maneuvering that needs to be done. Right. But ultimately, I will say the way I deal with this is I have a personal framework. It comes from Professor Vijay Govindarajan at Tuck, which is box 1, box 2, and box 3. Box 1 is about what you need to do today for today. And yes, the climate is challenging, so you have to think about all that needs to happen. It's this month, it's this quarter, it's this year. But box 3 is also about things that you're doing today that are going to make you successful in the future, right? So when we started, we were an offline company. But in some sense, because of COVID, we're completely online. And actually, that was a blessing in disguise. Right. When we started, we were in India, but now we're across the world. So what in your model actually can you sharpen and make it kind of a core capability that in the future is going to be a towering strength? So think about that as box 3. And box two, which is, kind of challenge every single assumption that you have, right? And I think this is a great moment for people, for founders especially, to reflect and say, look, do I really have to do this? Am I really that? Is B2C profitable? Should I be an enterprise company? So I think, look, it's an opportunity. It's obviously going to be difficult. And, every company is going to feel the pain. Many are already, including market leaders and public companies in their tech space. But I'm hopeful that, EdTech, I think, is, in my view, Deborah, again, probably you share this as well because you're a prolific investor in the space. Right? It's here to stay. There will be ups and downs, but eventually it is a growth industry.
Really well said. I think I will send that out to a few people I know. Thank you so much, Ashwin. Really appreciate your time, and I'm so excited we'll be able to show this at ASU+GSV. So thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Thanks for the opportunity as always.